When 12-year-old Sierra Jenkins steps into her father's upscale boutique after school, she's drawn to the sparkling display cases, dreaming of designing jewelry one day. But her innocent curiosity turns into a nightmare when a necklace falls from a display, and the store's manager, Marissa Blake, accuses her of theft. Within minutes, Sierra is handcuffed and humiliated, unaware that the very man who owns the store and can save her is her father, Derek Jenkins, a prominent civil rights lawyer. As Derek races to defend his daughter, he discovers more than just Marissa's prejudice. Hidden behind the polished glass and gleaming gems lies a system of discrimination embedded in the store's policies and practices. But as Derek digs deeper, Marissa's actions reveal a personal vendetta against him, one tied to a painful mistake from his past. With Sierra's trust shattered and tensions rising, Derek must navigate the courtroom, the media, and his own guilt to fight for justice. Can he protect his daughter while unraveling a web of systemic bias? Or will the pursuit of accountability cost him everything he's worked for? The boutique was quiet, its polished marble floors reflecting the gleaming cases of diamonds and gemstones. 12-year-old Sierra Jenkins wandered through the showroom, her sneakers making faint squeaks as she moved from one display to the next. She pressed her hands against the cool glass, staring in awe at the necklaces shimmering under the lights. "This one looks like starlight," she whispered to herself, enchanted by a delicate diamond pendant. Sierra loved these visits after school. Her father, Derek, always said his boutique was meant to be a place of beauty and inspiration, and to her, it felt magical. Today, he wasn't in the office, off to some meeting, but she didn't mind. The quiet let her imagine what it would be like to design jewelry one day. As she leaned closer to examine a small sapphire bracelet, her elbow brushed a necklace stand. She gasped as it toppled, the gold chain slipping off and clinking onto the glass below. "Oh no!" Sierra bent quickly to fix it, her heart racing. She picked it up gingerly, the chain dangling from her small fingers. "What do you think you're doing?" The sharp voice made Sierra flinch. She turned to see Marissa Blake, the store's manager, striding toward her with a scowl etched deep into her pale face. I dropped it by accident," Sierra stammered, holding up the necklace. Marissa's eyes narrowed. "Dropped it? Or tried to steal it?" Sierra's mouth fell open. "I wasn't stealing. I just touched the glass and it..." "Enough," Marissa snapped, snatching the necklace from Sierra's hand. "I knew something was off the moment you walked in here." Tears welled in Sierra's eyes. "It was an accident. I swear." Marissa didn't listen. Instead, her face darkened with disgust. "People like you think they can get away with anything?" The words hit Sierra like a slap, and then the actual slap came. Marissa's hand cracked across her cheek, and she stumbled back, clutching her face. "You little thief," Marissa hissed. "You're lucky I don't call the police right now." "I didn't steal anything," Sierra cried, but her voice shook with fear. Marissa ignored her, pulling out her phone. "I'll let them handle you." The boutique's glass doors swung open, and two police officers entered, their dark uniforms stark against the store's brightness. Sierra stood frozen, her cheeks streaked with tears as Marissa pointed at her. "That's her," Marissa said, her voice dripping with righteous indignation. "She tried to steal a necklace. I caught her red-handed." One of the officers, a tall man with a gruff expression, crouched to Sierra's eye level. "Is this true, young lady?" "No." Sierra shook her head furiously. "I didn't. It fell." "Save it," the officer said, his voice cold. He grabbed her arm and yanked her to her feet. "Please," Sierra whimpered. "I didn't do anything." But the officer was already cuffing her wrists behind her back. The cold metal bit into her skin, and a wave of humiliation crashed over her as other customers in the boutique stared. "Get her out of here," Marissa said with a smug smile. Across town, Derek Jenkins sat in a boardroom, a thick folder of legal documents in front of him. His phone buzzed on the table, and he glanced at the screen. It was Marla, one of his senior employees. "Excuse me," Derek said, stepping into the hallway to take the call. Mr. Jenkins, Marla said, her voice shaky, you need to get to the boutique right now. What's wrong? Derek asked, his brow furrowing. It's Sierra, Marla said. Marissa accused her of stealing, and the police. They've arrested her. Derek's blood ran cold. Arrested her? Yes. Please come quickly. Derek didn't wait for more details. He grabbed his coat and bolted out the door, his heart pounding. The boutique was a storm of tension when Derek arrived. He spotted Sierra immediately, her small frame hunched on a stool, her wrists cuffed, and her face streaked with tears. Derek's jaw clenched, and he stormed across the showroom. What is going on here? He demanded, his voice booming. The officers turned, startled by his commanding presence. Marissa stepped forward, her smug demeanor faltering slightly. Mr. Jenkins, she said, her tone shifting to faux professionalism. There's been an incident. This girl, Derek cut her off, is my daughter. Marissa's face drained of color. Your daughter? Derek didn't spare her another glance. He knelt in front of Sierra, gently taking her face in his hands. Are you okay, baby? Sierra nodded weakly, fresh tears spilling over. Derek stood and turned to the officers. Take those handcuffs off her. Now. Sir, one officer began. We were responding to a report. I don't care what you were responding to, Derek snapped. You don't cuff a child without evidence. Remove them. Now. The officers exchanged uneasy glances, then hurried to unlock the cuffs. Derek turned to Marissa, his eyes blazing. You accused my daughter of stealing? You humiliated her and called the police? Marissa stammered, her professional veneer crumbling. I didn't know she was your daughter. I thought. You thought wrong, Derek said coldly. We're not finished here. Derek stood in the center of the boutique, his fists clenched as Marissa stammered before him. The air between them felt charged, every word laden with fury. She dropped the necklace. Marissa began, her voice shaking. It looked suspicious. I was just doing my job. Doing your job? Derek's voice rose. Your job is to sell jewelry, not to assault and humiliate a child. She didn't look like she belonged here, Marissa muttered under her breath, but loud enough for Derek to catch. What did you just say? Derek stepped closer, his towering figure making Marissa retreat a step. Marissa swallowed hard, her professional facade crumbling. I thought she might be stealing. You thought wrong, Derek said, his voice cold as steel. And now, you're going to answer for it. My daughter is not a thief, and she will not be treated like a criminal in her father's store. Marissa's face paled, realization dawning. Your store, she whispered. Yes, Derek hissed. This store. My store. And you just humiliated and assaulted my daughter. Marissa opened her mouth to speak, but Derek cut her off with a glare. I'll deal with you later. For now, stay out of my sight. The ride home was silent. Sierra sat in the passenger seat, her arms wrapped around herself as she stared out the window. Derek glanced at her occasionally, his heart breaking at the sight of her tear-streaked face. When they arrived, Derek crouched in front of her at the door. Baby girl, he said softly, his hand brushing her shoulder. Talk to me. Sierra shook her head. I'm fine. You're not fine, Derek said gently. I know you're scared, and I know you're hurt, but I need to hear you. Please. Tears spilled down Sierra's cheeks. She called me a thief, Daddy. I didn't do anything, and she slapped me. Then they put handcuffs on me. Derek pulled her into a hug, holding her tightly. I'm so sorry, Sierra. I'm sorry you had to go through that. But I promise you, no one will ever treat you like that again. Sierra sniffled into his chest. Do they think I'm bad because of how I look? Derek's throat tightened. No, he said firmly. You are not bad. You are kind, smart, and talented. What happened today was about them, not you. And we're going to make sure they answer for it. The next morning, Derek was at the precinct, his anger barely contained as he waited for the officers involved in Sierra's arrest to meet him. When they arrived, he didn't bother with pleasantries. Do you have any idea what you put my daughter through? Derek demanded, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. The senior officer, a stocky man with graying hair, held up his hands defensively. "Mr. Jenkins, we were just responding to a call," the manager claimed. "I don't care what she claimed," Derek interrupted. "You put a 12-year-old in handcuffs without verifying the situation. Did you even bother to ask her side of the story?" The younger officer, clearly nervous, spoke up. "Sir, we were just following protocol." "Protocol?" Derek scoffed. "Your protocol should include basic decency and common sense. You didn't even investigate. You assumed she was guilty because someone said so." "We understand your frustration," the senior officer said. "If there's anything we can do, you can start by taking responsibility for your actions," Derek snapped. "And don't think for a second that this is over." Back at home, Derek sat in his study, surrounded by legal documents and surveillance footage from the boutique. He had already reached out to his legal team, laying the groundwork for a case against Marissa and the boutique's policies. His phone buzzed, and he answered without hesitation. "Jenkins." "Derek, it's Marla," his senior employee said. "I've been looking through the employee manual and some of the training policies. There are troubling things." "What kind of things?" Derek asked, leaning forward. "Subtle, but clear directives to profile customers based on appearance," Marla said. "It's written in corporate jargon, but the message is obvious." Derek's jaw tightened. "Send me everything you've got." After hanging up, he stared at the files on his desk. This wasn't just about Sierra anymore. It was about a system that allowed Prejudice to thrive, and he was going to take it down. Derek met Marla at the boutique that evening. She handed him a folder thick with documents. "These are the policies and memos I found," she said. "They're not explicit, but they definitely promote a culture of discrimination." Derek flipped through the papers, his anger growing with each page. One memo caught his eye. "Ensure high-value items are monitored closely when certain demographics are present." "This is what I built this store to fight against," Derek muttered, more to himself than to Marla. Marla nodded. "I know. That's why I thought you should see it." Derek looked up at her. "Thank you, Marla. This changes everything." As he left the boutique, Derek's resolve hardened. He wasn't just fighting for Sierra. He was fighting to dismantle the prejudice that had tainted his store and his vision. The legal battle was just beginning, but Derek was ready for it. Sierra sat cross-legged on her bed, a sketchpad open in front of her. She held a pencil loosely, drawing faint outlines of a pendant shaped like a teardrop. Her strokes were hesitant, each one betraying her inner turmoil. Her best friend, Alana, sat beside her, watching quietly. "You haven't said much about what happened," Alana ventured cautiously. Sierra sighed, her pencil still. "I don't know what to say. It's like, I can't stop hearing her voice, calling me a thief." Alana placed a comforting hand on Sierra's arm. "But you didn't do anything wrong." "I know." Sierra's voice cracked. "But it doesn't feel like that. The way they looked at me, the handcuffs." Her voice trailed off, and tears welled in her eyes. Alana leaned closer. "Sierra, you're one of the kindest people I know. What they did was awful, but it doesn't define you." Sierra wiped her tears and returned to her sketch. I don't want to feel small anymore." "You won't," Alana said firmly. "You're stronger than you think." Sierra nodded, her strokes growing bolder. The pendant began to take shape, its sharp lines symbolizing resilience. Derek sat at his desk, surrounded by stacks of documents Marla had provided. His eyes scanned a memo marked "Confidential," and his jaw clenched as he read the words. "Ensure heightened surveillance of specific demographics in high-value sections." He slammed the paper down and called Marla. "This is worse than I thought." "I told you," Marla replied. "These policies are deeply ingrained. They've been like this for years." Derek leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. "This isn't just about Marissa. This is systemic." "There's more," Marla said. "I dug into some emails. The corporate office has been instructing managers to prioritize certain customers over others." Derek exhaled sharply. "Send me everything. We're going to expose this." As he hung up, he glanced at a framed photo of Sierra on his desk. Her bright smile from a happier time stared back at him, fueling his resolve. They won't get away with this. Derek was locking up the boutique for the night when he heard footsteps behind him. He turned to see Marissa, her face shadowed in the dim streetlights. "What are you doing here?" Derek asked sharply. Marissa crossed her arms, her demeanor defiant. "I wanted to talk." "We have nothing to talk about," Derek replied, moving to leave. "Don't you want to know why I did it?" Marissa's voice stopped him in his tracks. Derek turned back, his expression wary. "Why you assaulted my daughter? Enlighten me." Marissa's lips curled into a bitter smile. "Because of you." "Me?" Derek frowned. "I don't even know you." "Oh, but you do," Marissa said, stepping closer. "Years ago, your law firm represented a developer. They bulldozed my family's business to build luxury condos. We lost everything." Derek's brow furrowed as he searched his memory. "That wasn't personal. It was my job. It was my life," Marissa snapped. "And now, you parade around with your boutique, acting like you care about people. I wanted you to feel what it's like to lose something precious." Derek's voice was icy. "You didn't hurt me, Marissa. You hurt my daughter. And for that, there will be consequences." Marissa's defiance faltered. "I didn't mean for it to go that far." "But it did," Derek said. "And you'll answer for it." Back at home, Derek sat in his study, Marissa's words echoing in his mind. He rifled through old case files until he found the one she had mentioned. The details came flooding back. A pro bono case representing a small developer who claimed to be revitalizing a neighborhood. He stared at the file, guilt gnawing at him. The developer's promises had sounded noble at the time, but he had never checked what happened afterward. Now he knew. Families like Marissa's had paid the price. His phone buzzed. It was his sister, Carla. "Hey, Derek," she said. "You sound stressed." "I am," he admitted. "I just found out that a case I handled years ago destroyed someone's life." "You didn't destroy anyone's life," Carla said gently. "You were doing your job, but I didn't look deeper," Derek said. "If I had, maybe I would have seen the impact." Carla's voice was firm. "You can't change the past, but you can make things right moving forward. Focus on Sierra. She needs you." Derek nodded, her words grounding him. "You're right. Thanks, Carla." The next morning, Derek stood in front of a row of cameras, reporters clamoring for his statement. Sierra watched from the side, her hand clasped tightly in Alana's. "My daughter was humiliated and assaulted in a store meant to be a safe space," Derek began, his voice steady. "But this isn't just about one person. It's about a system that allows prejudice to thrive." He held up a stack of documents. "These are internal memos from the boutique's corporate office, showing discriminatory practices and profiling policies." "This ends now." The crowd erupted into questions, but Derek held up a hand. "We're filing a lawsuit not just against Marissa Blake, but against the corporation that created and perpetuated these policies. We won't stop until justice is served." As Derek stepped away, Sierra approached him. "Daddy, are we really going to win?" Derek knelt to her level, his eyes filled with determination. "We're going to fight, Sierra, and together, we'll make sure no one else goes through what you did." Sierra nodded, her small hand slipping into his. For the first time in days, she felt a flicker of hope. The courtroom buzzed with subdued tension as the case against Marissa Blake officially began. Derek sat at the plaintiff's table, his expression steely. Sierra sat beside him, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Across the room, Marissa's lawyer stood to deliver his opening statement. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," the defense attorney began, "my client, Marissa Blake, acted out of concern for the safety and integrity of the boutique she managed. She made a difficult but necessary decision in what she believed to be a case of theft." Derek's attorney, Rachel Hill, rose to counter. "This case isn't about a difficult decision, it's about prejudice. It's about a manager who judged a child based on her appearance and escalated a minor incident into a traumatic experience." Rachel turned to the jury, her voice unwavering. "The evidence will show that Marissa Blake's actions weren't just unprofessional, they were fueled by systemic bias and personal resentment. And that's what we're here to fight." Derek placed a reassuring hand on Sierra's shoulder as Rachel sat down. "We're in this together," he whispered. The next day, Rachel presented the first piece of damning evidence: surveillance footage from the boutique. The jury watched as the video showed Sierra accidentally knocking the necklace to the ground, followed by Marissa's harsh reaction. Rachel paused the footage on the moment Marissa slapped Sierra. "This is not how an innocent mistake is handled," she said. "This is a blatant abuse of power." Marissa's lawyer objected, claiming the footage didn't provide full context, but the damage was done. The jury's eyes were fixed on the screen, their expressions hardening as they watched Marissa call the police and have Sierra handcuffed. Rachel turned to the jury. This wasn't about protecting the store. This was about humiliating a child. The first officer to take the stand was visibly uncomfortable under Rachel's cross-examination. "You handcuffed a 12-year-old without investigating the situation thoroughly," Rachel said, her tone cutting. "Why?" "We were acting on the manager's report," the officer replied. "She said the child was attempting to steal." Rachel raised an eyebrow. "And you didn't think to ask the child what happened? Or to review the security footage before taking action?" The officer hesitated. "It was protocol." "Protocol," Rachel repeated, her voice rising slightly. "Your protocol resulted in the humiliation of an innocent child. Would you say that's acceptable?" "No," the officer admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. The second officer's testimony was similar, highlighting the systemic flaws in how reports like Marissa's were handled. Rachel pressed the point home. This wasn't just about one person's prejudice. It was about a system that allowed such prejudice to thrive. When the time came for Sierra to testify, she gripped Derek's hand tightly. "You don't have to do this," he said softly. "Only if you're ready." Sierra nodded, though her voice trembled as she took the stand. I want people to know what really happened." Rachel guided her gently through her testimony. Sierra described how she had been looking at the jewelry and how the necklace had fallen. Her voice broke as she recounted Marissa's slap and the moment the police put her in handcuffs. "Did you feel like anyone believed you when you said it was an accident?" Rachel asked. Sierra shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "No, they didn't listen." Rachel placed a comforting hand on Sierra's shoulder as she finished her testimony. "You were brave," she said quietly. As Sierra stepped down, Derek pulled her into a hug. "I'm so proud of you." The trial neared its conclusion with Rachel's closing arguments. She stood before the jury, her voice clear and resolute. "This case is about more than just an incident in a boutique. It's about the assumptions we make, the biases we carry, and the systems that enable discrimination." She gestured toward Marissa. "The defendant acted out of prejudice, and that prejudice caused irreparable harm. But this isn't just about her. It's about ensuring that this kind of injustice doesn't happen again." Rachel turned to the jury. "You have the power to send a message today. A message that prejudice and systemic bias have no place in our society." As the jury began deliberations, Derek sat with Sierra outside the courtroom. "No matter what happens," he said, "we've already made a difference." Sierra leaned her head against his shoulder. "Do you think they'll understand?" "They will," Derek said, his voice filled with hope. "Because you showed them the truth." The media room was packed, cameras flashing as Sierra stepped up to the microphone. Derek stood just behind her, his reassuring presence giving her the courage to speak. Taking a deep breath, Sierra began, her voice trembling but clear. "My name is Sierra Jenkins. I'm 12 years old, and not long ago, I walked into my father's store and left in handcuffs." A murmur rippled through the room, and Sierra paused, steadying herself. "I didn't do anything wrong. I wasn't stealing. But that didn't matter, because someone looked at me and decided I didn't belong." Her voice grew stronger as she continued. "No one should ever feel the way I felt that day. No one should be judged by how they look. That's why we're here. So this doesn't happen to anyone else." Derek placed a hand on her shoulder as she finished. "Thank you, Sierra," he said softly, turning to address the reporters. "This is about accountability and change, not just for one person, but for a system that allows prejudice to thrive." The room erupted into applause as Sierra stepped down, relief washing over her. "You did amazing," Derek whispered, hugging her tightly. The courtroom was silent as Marissa took the stand. Her face was pale, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped the edges of the witness box. "Ms. Blake," Rachel began, her tone firm yet fair, Can you explain why you escalated the situation with Sierra Jenkins that day? Marissa hesitated, glancing toward the jury. I thought she was stealing. She looked suspicious. And by suspicious, you mean what exactly? Rachel pressed. What about Sierra made you suspicious? Marissa swallowed hard. She didn't look like the kind of person who could afford to shop there. There it was, the unspoken truth laid bare. A ripple of unease swept through the courtroom. Rachel nodded. And did you consider, even for a moment, that you might be wrong? Marissa faltered. I wasn't thinking clearly. I was under pressure, and I made a mistake. A mistake that involved slapping a child and calling the police, Rachel said pointedly. Do you regret your actions, Ms. Blake? Tears welled in Marissa's eyes. Yes, she said, her voice breaking. I do. I let my anger and my prejudice get the better of me. And I'm sorry. After hours of deliberation, the jury filed back into the courtroom. Derek sat with Sierra, his hand tightly gripping hers. Marissa sat across the room, her face drawn and pale. The foreperson stood, holding the slip of paper containing the jury's decision. On the charge of assault, we find the defendant, Marissa Blake, guilty. On the charge of false reporting, guilty. A collective breath was released throughout the courtroom. Derek closed his eyes, a wave of relief washing over him. Sierra looked up at him, her eyes wide. It's over, she whispered. Not over, Derek corrected gently. But this is a step in the right direction. Marissa's lawyer leaned in to speak to her, but she seemed lost in her thoughts, her face etched with regret. The day after the verdict, Derek sat in a meeting with the boutique's corporate executives. Their faces were a mix of defensiveness and unease as he laid the memos on the table. These policies encouraged profiling, Derek said firmly, and that culture allowed what happened to my daughter to occur. The CEO, a composed woman in her 50s, nodded slowly. Mr. Jenkins, we acknowledge the seriousness of this situation. What do you propose? Derek didn't hesitate. Mandatory sensitivity training for all employees, clear policies prohibiting profiling, and an independent oversight committee to ensure these changes are implemented. The executives exchanged glances before the CEO spoke again. We'll review these proposals, but I believe we can move forward with most of them. You'd better, Derek said, his tone sharp. Because this isn't just about Sierra. This is about every person who's been judged unfairly. That evening, Derek and Sierra sat on the porch of their home, watching the sun dip below the horizon. Sierra was sketching again, her pencil moving confidently across the page. What are you working on? Derek asked, sipping his coffee. She held up the drawing, a pendant shaped like a phoenix, its wings spread wide. It's about rising again, she said. Like us. Derek smiled, his heart swelling with pride. You're incredible, you know that? Sierra leaned against him. I just learned from the best. As the stars began to appear, Derek wrapped an arm around his daughter, a sense of peace settling over them both. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time, they felt ready for whatever came next. The boutique's interior buzzed with activity as employees attended a mandatory training session. Derek stood at the front, addressing the group. The tension in the air was palpable, but his calm authority kept the room engaged. This isn't just about correcting mistakes, Derek said, pacing slowly. It's about creating a culture where every person, regardless of their background, feels valued and respected. He gestured toward the new guidelines displayed on the projector. From now on, profiling is not just discouraged, it's prohibited. Every customer who walks through these doors deserves dignity. One employee, a young sales associate named Nina, raised her hand. Mr. Jenkins, how do we rebuild trust with the community after everything that's happened? Derek nodded thoughtfully. It starts here, with each of you. Treat every interaction as a chance to rebuild that trust. And know that I'll be here to support you every step of the way. As the session concluded, Sierra entered the room, carrying a sketchpad. Derek's face lit up as he beckoned her over. Everyone, meet Sierra, he said. She's been my greatest teacher in this journey. The employees clapped politely, and Sierra smiled shyly. She knew they had a long way to go, but seeing her father's determination gave her hope. Later that evening, Sierra sat on the living room couch, holding an envelope with Marissa's name scrawled on the front. Derek had handed it to her earlier, his expression unreadable. "Are you going to open it?" he asked, sitting beside her. Sierra hesitated, her fingers tracing the edges of the envelope. "What if it just makes me feel worse?" "Then we deal with that together," Derek said gently. "But sometimes, hearing someone's truth can help us heal." Taking a deep breath, Sierra opened the envelope and unfolded the letter. The words were shaky but sincere. "Sierra, I can't undo what I did, and I know my actions hurt you deeply. I've spent every day since thinking about how my anger blinded me. It's not an excuse, but I hope someday you'll find it in your heart to forgive me. You taught me something important. That healing starts with accountability. I'm taking steps to change, and I hope you'll believe me when I say I'm truly sorry. Marissa." Sierra handed the letter to Derek, her emotions swirling. "I don't know if I can forgive her." "Not yet." "That's okay," Derek said. "Forgiveness takes time. What matters is that you decide what's best for you." Sierra nodded, feeling a small weight lift. Maybe forgiveness wasn't immediate, but she could start to think about it. A month later, Derek stood on the stage of a packed auditorium, addressing a crowd gathered for the launch of his nonprofit, Justice Unchained. The energy in the room was electric, the audience a mix of community leaders, activists, and everyday people inspired by his story. "We're here because change doesn't happen in isolation," Derek said, his voice strong. "It takes a collective effort to dismantle systemic discrimination and build a world where everyone is treated with fairness." He gestured toward Sierra, who was seated in the front row. "My daughter taught me the power of resilience. She's the reason I'm standing here today." The crowd erupted in applause as Sierra walked onto the stage. Nervously adjusting the microphone, she began to speak. "I used to think my voice didn't matter," she said, "but now I know that sharing my story can help others." Her words resonated deeply, and when she stepped back, Derek wrapped an arm around her. Together, they symbolized hope and progress, inspiring the audience to take action. The next weekend, Derek and Sierra visited the neighborhood park, the warm sun casting a golden glow over the trees. Sierra carried her sketch pad, while Derek brought a picnic basket. As Sierra settled onto a bench, sketching the outline of a new jewelry piece, Derek unpacked sandwiches. "What's this one about?" he asked, glancing at her drawing. "It's a compass," Sierra said, holding up the design. "To remind people to find their way, no matter how lost they feel." Derek smiled, his chest swelling with pride. "You've got a gift, Sierra." She looked up at him, her expression soft. "You know, Daddy, I couldn't have done any of this without you." Derek sat beside her, pulling her into a gentle hug. "You've always had it in you. I just helped you see it." They spent the afternoon laughing, talking, and dreaming about the future. For the first time in months, their world felt steady again. Months later, Sierra stood in the boutique, surrounded by family and friends. The grand launch of her first jewelry line, Phoenix Rising, was in full swing. The display cases sparkled with pieces inspired by resilience, justice, and hope. Derek watched proudly as Sierra greeted customers, explaining the inspiration behind her designs. A reporter approached him, microphone in hand. "Mr. Jenkins, how does it feel to see your daughter achieving this?" "It's incredible," Derek said. "This line isn't just jewelry. It's a testament to Sierra's strength and creativity. She's turned something painful into something beautiful." As the reporter moved on, Sierra joined him, holding one of her pendants. "This one's for you," she said, slipping it into his hand. Derek examined the pendant, a phoenix with wings shaped like flames. "It's perfect," he said, his voice thick with emotion. The event ended with Sierra standing on the boutique's small stage, addressing the crowd. "This is more than a jewelry line," she said. "It's a reminder that we can rise above anything." The audience erupted into applause, and Derek knew they had not just survived their ordeal, they had thrived. Together, they had built a brighter tomorrow.